Hello and welcome to the Bucket Lister podcast. Join your host Keith Crockford along with special guests who have travelled the world, here to share stories of their adventures and plenty of inspo to add to your bucket list. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. I am your host Keith Crockford, and today I am going to be chatting about a new trip we are launching at the Bucket List Company next week. Now, this trip has always been on my bucket list and a destination that I have always wanted to visit. And it's one of those places that, as many people know, I love the Himalayas, and I love going to Nepal, and I love all the regions around there. And one place that I've always wanted to visit, where we are launching our new trip next week, and we're launching it for a 2027 trip, actually, is going to be to Bhutan. And I think, I did a little bit of a poll on a couple of our Facebook groups last week, and there was so much interest of people who want to go and visit Bhutan and want to go and experience Bhutan, that it was kind of a must that we added it on to the Bucket List Company as one of our bucket list trips. And I'm super excited about it. I think we're launching a trailblazer trip to start with, and I think it's really, really going to sell out super quickly. And for those of people who don't know, whenever we launch a new trip, at the Bucket List Company, we call it a trailblazer trip, and we run it because I've put together a program. I'm hoping that program will be super amazing, and everyone's going to love doing it. But obviously, with it being the first trip we've ever run with a group, we advertise it as a trailblazer so that it's kind of, you can go out and test it for us. And for that, we give a generous discount for the first trip to go out. So that's the whole point of our Trailblazer program, really, is that it gives people a chance to almost go and be crash test dummies and give us their feedback on the trip. And to be honest, every time we've done a Trailblazer trip, we've changed very little of the itineraries. Everybody's loved the itineraries. We've spent a lot of time looking at the itinerary, putting the itinerary together, making sure there's a great mix of stuff in there that people are going to want to do. And this one for Bhutan, I think, really is the best of Bhutan. And why do people want to go and visit Bhutan? Well, I think one thing about Bhutan is just how quiet the country is. And the way they do things in Bhutan from a sustainability perspective. And one thing that they certainly don't want to do is have over tourism in their country. So they really do practice a high value, low impact tourism policy. And to do this, they have a mandatory daily tariff that tourists have to pay. And it actually, in high season, comes out at around about $250 per person per day, is their mandatory minimum tariff. So the thing with going and visiting Bhutan is you can't go and do it on the cheap. You can go in the low season and the tariff is slightly lower. But in the main season, you have to go out and make sure that you are paying that mandatory minimum tariff. They also have a sustainable development fee in Bhutan, which is a $65 taxation. And this goes towards paying for free education for people. It goes towards promoting more sustainable travel. It goes into the infrastructure development. It goes into their free healthcare system over there. So it's basically putting a tax to make sure that everyone in Bhutan is benefiting from tourists going in and visiting. The other thing with Bhutan is there's also a $40 entrance fee visa to get in as well. So there's quite a lot of taxation and visas, etc., to go and visit Bhutan. If you've ever been to visit, if you've ever looked at going there, you will see the costs of the trips, and they are not. It's not a cheap trip to go to Bhutan. If you compare it with regions around Bhutan, so Nepal, India, visiting Bhutan is a lot more expensive than going to any of those. But saying that, we have put together a really great itinerary that I don't think breaks the bank. And looking at other packages, there are other packages for shorter durations than what we're going for. We've designed a 12-day, 11-night package. It will be longer than that because that doesn't include flights getting there. But when you look at other packages for that sort of, and you compare our price, I think you're going to see that actually the value in our Bhutan trip is amazing. The other thing that I love about Bhutan is obviously most countries talk about their GDP within the country. And Bhutan in the 1970s, I think it was, they changed this to a GNH, or a gross national happiness. And this was the philosophy that it was introduced by the fourth king. And it considers that the happiness of its citizens is an essential metric of the nation's development, more so than money. And aspects like sustainable development and promotion of cultural values, conservation, and good governance form more than just the value of money. And obviously, with Bhutan being a very Buddhist country, and its spiritual influences there just affect every part of daily life over there, from the prayer flags in the mountains to all the monasteries to the amazing festivals that take place throughout the year. I just think I'm just so looking forward to this trip. Like, I'm just so looking forward to going there, checking it out, and then leading a bucket list trip there as well, because I really, really can't wait to go and discover what Bhutan has to offer as a destination. What else about Bhutan then? Like, obviously, there is lots of things to see in Bhutan. There's the cultural elements in Bhutan. There is the hiking and the trekking in Bhutan, because you are in the Himalayas. And for me, putting together an itinerary was quite difficult, because what I didn't want to do was put together a purely trekking orientated itinerary for this one. I wanted to include trekking in it, but I didn't want to add in multi-day trekking into this trip. I wanted it to be so that anybody that had Bhutan on their bucket list could come on this trip. There is going to be some trekking during the days for those people that want to do it, but it's more about it being more accessible. Like, there are people out there that don't want to go and do multi-day treks. There are those people that love doing multi-day treks. But I don't think that is the main reason for visiting Bhutan, is to go multi-day trekking. From my perspective, it was about going and seeing the culture and immersing yourself in Bhutan, using trekking to get to come and see some of those amazing places, but not trekking day after day after day. Obviously, there are loads of long distance treks in Bhutan. There's the Snowman Trek, for example, which is a really hard 25-day trek. And it is considered as one of the world's hardest treks. Now, as much as that would be amazing to go and do, I think our audience is not looking for that in terms of why we would want to go there. So we will be doing treks up to go in, do things such as, the Tiger's Nest, going and seeing sites like that. But predominantly it's going to be based more around culture, more around, like I say, immersing yourself into those into the Bhutan itself and into the culture and in everything that it has to offer. Now, again, certain things about Bhutan. We talked about the taxation in Bhutan, the government daily fees, and if you are going as a tourist into Bhutan, that needs to all be arranged for you before you go. So, we are working with a local company in Bhutan that will arrange that for everybody, as well as the visas to get into Bhutan. And that's all included in the cost of the trip. So there is nothing for you to do from that perspective. That will all be sorted out before you go. The other thing that I was really thinking about when we were putting this trip together was actually trying to keep the cost down whilst we're in Bhutan. So trying to come up with, as much as I can, an all-inclusive package that once you have paid for the trip, then there isn't going to be lots of extra things to add on when you're there. So in that instance, like, we've included breakfast and evening meal into the cost of the trip every day. It's only going to be lunches whilst we're out and about that are going to need to be bought. So there's a huge expense already looked after from that perspective. The other things are that you can't just go and explore Bhutan yourself. You have to do it. If you are from the UK, there are several countries that are able to do it. And India is one. The Maldives is another one. And then there's a third. Bangladesh is the other one. So India, Bangladesh, and the Maldives, you don't need to pay the visa fees, and you can also travel more independently than you can if you are if you're a British citizen or an American citizen or whatever. So there are, if you're from one of those, you don't need to hire a local guide. You can explore Bhutan more independently. But if you are coming from anywhere else in the world, then you are going to need to have a local guide with you throughout your trip. So if you are looking to go to Bhutan, then potentially you are going to need to go on to a group trip, or go and find a company in Bhutan that can arrange it all for you and guide you around themselves, because you can't just book to go to Bhutan and then explore yourselves. So this is why group trips like this, where the itinerary's already been put together, is super, super useful. And because, we've spent the time looking and thinking about where the best places to go are, what the best things to see are. And I'm just looking down through the itinerary now that we're going to be launching next week. And, we've got hiking. There's a day of whitewater rafting in there. Like I said, we're going up to the Tiger's Nest, which sits up at 900 meters on the side of a mountain almost. And if you ever see that iconic picture anywhere, looking down through the valley from the monastery, then that's the Tiger's Nest. That's what everyone thinks about. In terms of Bhutan as a place, obviously it is in the Himalayas, so altitude wise, you're sort of anything from 2,040 meters is the lowest point in Bhutan, and it goes all the way up to 7,541 meters above sea level. And we will be going up to about 3,500 meters is as high as we go on our trek and on our trip when we're going around. Bhutan has around about 700,000 inhabitants. So it's not a very overly populated place compared to other destinations that we visit. And I think that's one of the real plus points about visiting Bhutan, is that it's not overcrowded. I know a lot of people want to go trekking in the Himalayas and go to Nepal, but they really don't like Kathmandu because of the hustle and bustle of it. And that's not what you're going to find in Bhutan itself. So in terms of language-wise, English is widely spoken in Bhutan. So, there's no problems for you there. Obviously, as we always say to people, it's always handy to learn a few local phrases to get you by. But, English, like I said, is widely spoken whilst you're there. How do we get to Bhutan? Because as you'd anticipate, there's not lots of tourists going there like other destinations. So there are no direct flights to Bhutan. We would have to go, and obviously we're so far ahead of our trip being launched. We don't even know which route we're going to take yet. But if you are thinking of going, then Bhutan's international airport is Paro Airport, Paro. And to get there, you will need to go from somewhere like Delhi or Kathmandu, Bangkok or Singapore. And then there are two airlines then that fly from those destinations into Bhutan itself. And that's Druk Air and Bhutan Airlines. So obviously, in terms of getting there, it's not an easy destination to get to, which also means as well that kind of international flights are quite expensive because obviously there isn't low-cost airlines that are keeping the prices down. So they have got a bit of a monopoly on the pricing to get in there. And as we know from what we were talking about earlier, that Bhutan doesn't want a country full of tourists, really. They really want to keep the numbers low and offer good quality when you're there. And that's why, from a hotel's perspective, we've tried to go. So we've sort of priced our trip in around sort of 3 and 4 star hotels while we're there. Ideally, we'd like to be in a 4-star hotel. There's some of the places that don't have any 4 or 5 star hotels that we're visiting. They have only got 3 stars. So from that perspective, there's a couple of nights when we'll be in 3-star hotels on the trip. But for the majority of the time, we will be staying in 4-star hotels when we're there. Quite a lot of people ask, is Bhutan safe to go and travel to? And obviously, with it being a Buddhist country, crime rates are extremely low in Bhutan compared to other places. But obviously, it is always crucial to remain cautious and aware of your surroundings. When is the best time to go? Well, the best time to go, it kind of fits in reasonably well. And if you're in the Himalayas, if you're used to Nepal, then you kind of know it's the same sort of seasons as Nepal in essence. So you're looking at autumn, September to November, spring, March to May. Those are the main times to go. They'll have the same monsoon seasons as kind of Nepal have in the summer. And then winter getting colder as well. So that's something to consider. We're planning our trip for March 2027. So just at the start of the spring season is when we're launching our trip. What about the food in Bhutan? Well, obviously where it is, Bhutan draws lots of its influences from kind of Tibet, China, India. So lots of food is made with chilies, cheese. There's lots of curry dishes. And that's kind of if you've been to Nepal, if you've been anywhere around that area, then that's the sort of food that's then going to be on offer. I'm just trying to think what else to tell you about Bhutan, really, because like I said, I'm just super excited about it and cannot wait to go. If you just look at the images of it and go and do some research on Bhutan, then you will really see what the country has to offer. If you head over to the Bucket List Company website, I've put some some blogs. I wrote some blogs this week and articles on the website that cover quite a lot of the things that you might be thinking about in terms of visiting. So I've wrote best things to do in Bhutan. Is it safe to travel in Bhutan? Do I need a visa for Bhutan from the UK? When's the best time to visit? And then, like I say, more importantly, how much does it cost to travel? And I think that's the real one to go and have a look at and get an understanding of the costs associated with going. Because when you see package prices to go there, you might think to yourself, well, that's super expensive. But when you realize all of the minimum fees and the visas, etc., you then soon realize that actually it's a relatively good package in terms of all of the extra things that have been included in your package that you have to pay for to be there anyway. So, like I said, we are launching our trip there next Wednesday. Today, when this podcast goes live, our priority list is being launched. On the priority list, you will get access to have all of the details of the trip before anybody else gets access to them. So if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm really tempted with going here, actually you can get yourself added to the priority list. You'll get all the details, the prices, and the opportunity to book before it goes out to release to the general public later on the day, next Wednesday. So we generally launch the priority list at 8:00 in the morning next Wednesday, and they'll have sort of 4 hours before we launch it to the general public to be able to jump onto that trailblazer trip. It's the same as when we launched our Maldives liveaboard trip, and that one, there's still a couple of places left on that one now. I think we've got 2 spaces left on that trailblazer. But in terms of this Bhutan one, I kind of get the impression that it's not going to go past the priority list. From the poll that I did and the questions that people have been asking me over the last week, I really, really don't think this is going to go that far. I think it's going to sell out quite quickly. I think when people see the price of the trailblazer, I think they're going to jump on it, because I really, really do think that we're not going to I don't think you're going to be able to visit Bhutan for this itinerary as cheap ever again, is how I see it. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to the priority list into the show notes for this podcast. I will also put a link into each of the blogs that I wrote this week, all about the different parts in different, building up a trip and looking at it to Bhutan. So you can do a little bit more research as well. Obviously, it might be that you're going to go at another time. You want to go sooner. Our trip's too far away. But obviously, you can still have a look at those articles and grab some ideas and think about actually, should Bhutan be making its way onto your bucket list? But hopefully, this podcast has inspired you to think about it and go and look at Bhutan in more detail. Because, if you are an avid traveler, I think it's a great one to add to your bucket list. And I also think, like I always say to people, when people say, and I did this podcast about my favorite trip, and obviously at the number one spot when I recorded that podcast only a few weeks ago, it was Easter Island was the top trip that I love to go on from the bucket list trips. And my reason for that was because I know very few people who have been to Easter Island, and I kind of quite like that. And when I think about Bhutan, I know very few people who have been to Bhutan as well. And I think it's just really cool to say, that's a destination that, I've visited, and you go into the pub and you have a chat, and where have you just come back from? I've just come back from Bhutan. I think it's one of those places that you can really get into a conversation with people about, because they're not going to know very much about it. They're not going to know anybody that's been there. And like I say, that's the thing I love about Easter Island. And I think that will be the thing that I'm going to love more about Bhutan as well. And imagine in a few years' time, Bhutan might make its way higher up my list of top bucket list trips. But hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Hopefully it's given you some inspiration to look into this topic more. And hopefully you'll want to get yourselves on the priority list. And obviously, if you are listening to this episode in a few weeks' time, then it might be too late, and I'm really sorry. But that's well, I'm just trying to let people know about it now for the launch next week. But obviously there are bits and pieces in here that are still super, super interesting for you if you are thinking of going. And hopefully there might be some spaces left, or we'll have launched the trips for the future as well. So anyway, that's everything from me today. Hope you've had a lovely time listening. If you could go and give us a like and a review on your preferred platform. So if you listen to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to it, if you could just go and give us a quick subscribe and a 5-star review, that would be amazing, because it just gets us put out in front of more people, and more people can listen to this podcast, and that'll be really helpful for us. So when you finish this one, if you could go and do that, that would be amazing. But until next week, when I'm back with another episode, goodbye, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bucket Lister podcast. Be sure to click follow to be alerted for next week's episode. For more travel inspiration, check us out at www.thebucketlistcompany.co.uk or follow us on socials. See you next time.